They said she was beautiful once, not in the way modern minds might imagine. No, her beauty was of a darker hue, sculpted by shadowed candlelight and the scent of rotten roses. Her name was Isabeau de Saint, daughter of a minor French noble whose chateau perched like a vulture above the river Loire. By all accounts, she was born beneath an ill-fated moon. And yet, when she walked into a room, even the stone walls seemed to hold their breath. She never bathed. None of them did. Not her father, not her tutor, not the trembling servants who wrapped themselves in layers of lavender sachets and crushed to mint, believing that nature's fragrance could smother sin. This is not fiction. This is Europe, France. To be precise, in the mid-15th century, when the fear of water ran deeper than the Seine itself. Bathhouses, once communal places of hygiene and discourse, were now seen as dens of lust and moral decay. The clergy preached that excessive washing invited vanity, and vanity, as we know, is the gateway to damnation. But we forget the stench, the lice, the unwashed bodies swaddled in superstition, and we forget why. Not the kind you could name, but something ancient, damp and clawing. Her mother died before Isabeau could walk. Her father, obsessed with alchemy, drank mercury in hopes of longevity. Others claimed it was the absence of water that preserved her, as if her flesh had never been exposed to the corruption of rivers or rain. The walls of their home were lined with tapestries woven with myth, serpents, angels, women with halos and hollow eyes. The skin beneath her chemise was not glowing, it was gray, pocked and brittle like parchment. The scent of herself, masked by rose oil and violet powder, made her nauseous, yet still she obeyed the rituals, never questioning why her body, unwashed, had become a temple of decay. We often picture the past with poetic indulgence, perfumes, velvet gowns, gilded mirrors, fogged by sighs. To understand this fear, this abhorrence of bathing, we must go back further still, beyond Isabeau, beyond the whispers of her lineage, to the fall of Rome. To be clean was to be civilized. But when the empire collapsed, so too did the rituals that had kept the body pure. Isabeau's father fell. His skin turned black in patches and he coughed up blood that steamed in the cold. And then, one morning, she summoned the chambermaid with a single instruction. The physician arrived on horseback with leeches and chants. No bathing, he insisted. Too wet to skin now would be a death sentence. To cleanse the body, it was believed, was to strip away the filth that guarded the soul from temptation. And so, layer upon layer of clothing replaced the ritual of water. Linen shifts were worn close to the skin, changed daily. While the outer garments, stiffed with embroidery industrially, saw sunlight, the Romans worshipped cleanliness. Aqueducts stretched across the empire like veins of marble, feeding colossal bathhouses where citizens scrubbed, soaked, and debated philosophy in steam. As Christian doctrine spread, it brought with it a new theology, one that married the flesh with shame. Isabeau's ancestors, like many of noble blood, banned in the bath not out of poverty, but out of conviction. And yet, the absence of water did not protect them. In the damp corridors of the Saint Valère estate, Isabeau grew up with a sickness in the air, and Isabeau, pale as the moon and unspoiled by soap, was the jewel of this forgotten kingdom. Visitors to the estate often remarked that her skin glowed. Some said it was the milk compresses her nursemaid applied by candlelight. But Isabeau knew the truth. She had seen it once in a mirror warped by time and frost. Then came the winter of 1462. The frost arrived early, sealing the Loire in silence. And so the air grew thicker, heavier, as death crept into the folds of drapery and under the floorboards. Isabeau locked herself in the west wing, where the stained glass windows cast crimson shapes onto her bed. She began writing letters to whom? No one knew. Boil water. The girl, young, terrified, stammered that it was forbidden. Boil it, Isabeau repeated, and bring it to me. Isabeau has requested hot water anat, considered heretical in a world where water was feared more than fire. What drove her to defy this silent decree? The water boiled over like the breath of an ancient beast, spilling from the copper basin and hissing onto the stone hearth. The chambermaid trembled as she carried it, her hands slicked with sweat and melted wax. Leave it there, Isabeau commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of something long buried light, the echo of a forgotten vow whispered in a chapel consumed by dust. For the first time in her life, Isabeau touched warm water. It did not melt her skin. It did not summon demons or strip her soul bare, as the priests had always warned. It simply burned. Her skin, cracked and dry like the earth after a long drought, flushed red and wept with invisible wounds. And beneath that pain was something else. Release. In the 15th century, Western medicine had become a theater of superstition. Health depended on their delicate balance, and water, especially hot water, was believed to disrupt that harmony. Scholars still clung to the ancient Roman theory of the four humors: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. Worse, they feared that heat opened the pores, inviting disease to crawl in through the skin like a serpent seeking shelter. 2. Bathe especially in the cold. Monks was seen as an invitation to death. Among the nobility, cleanliness was not just dangerous, it was vulgar. Filth was moral armor. Scented oils, rose powder, and thick brocade masks were used to hide the decay that festered beneath silken lace. To remain unwashed was to remain untouched by sin. And yet, Isabeau washed. After that first bath, she did not stop. She laid flax claws across her chamber floor to catch the water. Her hair, once stiff with sheep, fattened centuries of dust, softened into a dark cascade that shimmered in candlelight. She steeped herbs, basil, bay leaves, cruised angelic and sat among them as if the very plants whispered secrets to her skin. She soaked 4 hours in silence, as though scrubbing away something deeper than dirt, something inherited. And something strange began to happen. Her skin changed, no longer ashen. It began to glow, not with unnatural brightness, but with life. The servants whispered, "Witch?" Rumors caught flame. She lifted the copper ladle and slowly poured warm water across the back of his hand. They said she had broken her vow to God, that she had summoned spirits through water, opened a gate with every drop that touched her cursed flesh. A priest was sent from Bourges, silver crucifix clenched in one fist, holy oil in the other. He entered her chamber like a man approaching a tomb. "You have opened the gates of hell," he hissed. The servants, when questioned, could only mutter their oaths and cross themselves. A few were found days later, dead by the river, violet leaves stuffed into their mouths. Isabeau said nothing. Her eyes did not leave his. The priest fled. He left behind his book of Psalms and his faith. Soon after, Isabeau disappeared. Her room was sealed. The West Wing fell into disuse. But in a diary found decades later, scrawled in the brittle parchment of a forgotten apothecary, one line remained legible. She understood. She saw. She believed that water was not a threat but a return, and that made her dangerous. Tubade had become an act of rebellion, not just against Custer, but against a rotting Europe, cloaked in incense and fear, hidden in the cellar of Chateau St. Vallier, under lock, key, and prayer, against priests who feared the body, against doctors who drained blood to balance what they did not comprehend, against a world that had forgotten how to be alive beneath the weight of its own stench. Isabeau was gone, but the basin de Verouan, they say if you press your ear against the metal, you can still hear a single drop falling over and over and over, like a secret no one was brave enough to wash away. Europe tried to seal water away like a curse, but death, terrible, black, and breathing would force the world to bathe again. The plague arrived in silence. It did not knock. It did not scream. It seeped through ports, through rats, through cloth. By the time the bells tolled in Paris, it was too late. The Black Death, 1347. That body stacked like firewood outside the abbeys. That mothers ran from their coffin children. That entire villages vanished between. They say the air itself turned thick, and in that silence, another fear crept in. Had filth invited the plague? Or had cleanliness driven it away? Europe's distrust of water was unraveling, but slowly, painfully. Some physicians clung to old beliefs. They said the plague floated in bad air, in corrupted mists rising from swamps and cellars. They carried pomander, small metal balls filled with herbs and vinegar, hoping to purify the air around them. But in the East, in the shining courts of Baghdad, in the tiled bathhouses of Constantinople, people still washed daily. The contrast was damning. Travelers returned with stories of steam rooms, of scrubbing rituals, of soap that smelled of pine and citrus, and more importantly, of cities less ravaged by death. It was not science, not yet, but it was suspicion. And suspicion, in the absence of faith, is a powerful thing. By 1500, a strange reversal had begun. Cities like Florence, Venice, and even plague-torn Paris began reopening bathhouses tentatively, cautiously, behind thick velvet curtains and under strict surveillance. But it was not yet about health. It was about status. To bathe became a mark of wealth, of leisure, of sensual indulgence. The poor still feared water. The clergy still condemned it. But the nobility, they rediscovered pleasure. And so the bath returned, dripping with perfume, shadowed by sign. Where was the sabo that her blood never boiled, that the water had preserved her? One where women were said to bathe under moonlight, singing hymns that no church would recognize. Like steam rise and vanish, dead, perhaps, or lost, as some whispered, to a convent deep in the forests of Auvergne. French courtiers soaked in rose water and orange blossom, mimicking Eastern rituals without understanding them. Some claim she survived the plague untouched, in case the pores betrayed them, but perfumed obsessively. Then the brave, then the sick, that her skin never broke, still feared water was returning, became rare theatrical events, stanched with musk, but stories. What did survive was her rebellion, not as ritual or rebellion, but as reason. By the 17th century, it became armor. Louis XIV, the son, king bathed rarely, his court mass diseased with powder baths, instruments sterile, streets drained, porcelain tubs shaped like seashells, servants heating dozens of kettles. It was life. Amid enlightenment salons and flickering gas lamps, doctors began to whisper a heresy of their own. Doctors standing by, and yet creeping back into the homes of the rich. And bring it to me. It would take one more wave of death, not of plague, but of knowledge to change everything. In the late 1700s, cleanliness was not vanity. Hospitals were clean, soap became more than perfume. And finally, at last, bathing was reborn. Isabeau never lived to see this age. But somewhere in the marble corridors of the hood, a young nurse might have read her name, inked faintly in the margins of a lost journal. And when she ran warm water over her hands before touching a patient, perhaps she felt a voice in her blood say, "Boil the water." History washed itself clean, but the stain of fear remained. Faint as perfume on dead silk. By the dawn of the 19th century, water no longer whispered. From behind curtains it roared through pipes. Cities throbbed with machines, gas lights, and soot. The industrial age had arrived, and with it a new obsession, modernity. No longer content with perfume and powdered wigs, the rising bourgeoisie demanded plumbing. Soap factories and enamel bathtubs gleamed like altars to a new god. Hygiene, but it wasn't just luxury, nah, it was survival. In 1846, Hungarian physician Ignaz Semmelweis made a terrifying discovery. Women were dying in childbirth, not from sin or spirit's butt, because doctors wouldn't wash their hands. He introduced hand washing with chlorinated lime water. Mortality rates plummeted, and yet his peers mocked him. To admit such a simple thing, that water could save a life, was to confess that their hands had been killing for centuries. Semmelweis died in an asylum, but his idea lived on. By the early 20th century, the war on disease had a new weapon: soap and steam. Isabeau would have wept. She had touched it with trembling fingers in a copper basin no larger than a cradle. She, born in wrought and velvet, had seen the truth in flickers between rose petals and fever. But truth, in her time, was dangerous. Truth wore a noose of incense and scripture. She was not a prophet, not a scientist. She was only a girl who wanted to feel clean. By the 1950s, the modern bathroom was standard. White tiles, chrome fixtures, hot water at a twist. Children bathed every evening. Soap became pink, blue, shaped like animals. Cleanliness was no longer radical. It was routine, expected, enforced. And yet, a shadow remained, because the old fears never fully died. They evolved. Fear of the body became shame. The church no longer warned us that washing invites demons, but advertising warned us that smelling human invites disgust. We no longer believed filth was holy, but we began to believe imperfection was a sin. And so the rituals returned, repackaged, not as sacraments, but products. Exfoliate, mass, rinse, repeat. The altar now is a bathroom mirror. The priesthood, influencers, the gospel, cleanse until you disappear. But sometimes, just sometimes, when you close the door, light a candle and run. The water hot until the mirror weeps. You hear something ancient rise in the steam. Her name, Isabeau. She lives now, not in stone or in sin, but in every hand that dares reach for water, not out of vanity, but out of remembrance. Because once, not so long ago, a woman had to risk damnation. just to feel human.